Chill here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and our two videos. When was Neptune with Beta Persei and when was Pluto with Beta Persei? And the reason is that Beta Persei comes very prevalent. We talk about the esoterics of Israel. So I do believe that the role of now here's the thing. Okay. Honoring the feminine. Yes, I will keep quiet. Beta Persei is not about reforming, but about unrooting anything rapey within ourself, our psyche, in spirit and in matter, and our society. If not, it just turns the violators into stone. And when I say stone, I don't mean Rushmore Mountain. I mean more like when you go in Europe and you see the mass graves and the underts and the lines of anonymous graves. And when they say the Great War, they don't mean the Second World War. They mean the first. Now, I'm not sure where was Pluto in the first. But before Pluto, we're gonna have Neptune. And I believe Neptune is going to be within the square with Pluto on Beta Persei. A hard aspect of a planet, of an outer planet around Beta Persei, with another outer planet. Is something that I think I don't wish even on my enemies. In fact, I never wish harm on my enemies. Even when I wish them death is euthanasia. And it's not because I'm not cruel, but because I'm quite reasonable. But the people that do come to wish harm on enemies usually do that from situation of a lot of emotional harm. And usually the people they wish harm on are not the ones that created that situation. If that was the case, then people would wish harm on the cults that created the situation. Now, no, if Adolf Hitler was born with no, it doesn't tell me. He was born in the 1880s, and he would have Pluto Gemini. So I believe the First World War would not be with Pluto Beta Persei. So we'd have to go a little bit backward from the 1880s to see when was Pluto with Beta Persei. Because the 1880s were the conjunction with Pluto and Neptune, which was the big foundation of Standard Oil as a global company. That would take, I don't know how fast Pluto is moving through Gemini, but it's a little bit, I think a little bit less than a decade, and that would be the 1870s, where Pluto would be around Beta Persei. What was happening there, I don't know, and the internet is not really operating. And then for Neptune, Beta Persei, we would have, if the coming Aries in the 50s is going to have Neptune going from, talk about the 50s, so right now we are with Neptune, the beginning of Aries, let's say 2025 is more or less the ingress. 15 years would be 2040, and another somewhat 15 years would be the 2060s. And this is where we're going to have Pluto Beta Persei squaring Neptune Beta Persei squaring Pluto. Neptune is both the miraculous creation of immense loss, false light, and real light. Beta Persei, what Neptune comes to bring is miraculous curation of Beta, of basically Medusa Gorgona, except that he is associated with Poseidon. And this is where I think Uranus will bring in the gnosis that the rapist was raped, and so the curation of the rapist from being an offender is the curation of him having been the victim, where he actually was the victim, which was not by the person that he raped. I've been saying that since the Me Too, but because those things are associated with tremendous dissociation and loss of sense of self, then that's kind of like the terrifying thing. So I predict Neptune to bring kind of a miraculous curation of the Gorgona stories. But then the square to Pluto, which would be from Leo, so Pluto would be around Regulus, would be that we're going to have powerful. If you think about the god as king, it's kind of like Pluto Regulus. We had Pluto Regulus actually. We had Pluto Regulus in the 1950s, 1956-7, I think, was the back and forth of Pluto and Regulus. Actually, Marc Dutroux has Pluto Regulus. So his sun is in Scorpio, I believe, because it was before Regulus moved to Virgo, so it was back then 29 degrees Leo, tropically speaking. But now it would be from Virgo, although the square would be, I think, beginning from Leo. So we're gonna put Neptune, Taurus, 26 degree. Um, and the fact that Uranus is towards the square relation with Ketu in Magha is a timeline, is a chapter in the chapter that will unfold with that Neptune. So we had it in 1886, before the birth of Hitler. And we're going to have it in 2049. (1886-7), and then we're going to have that in 2049. This is 1880s. Back then Pluto was in 3-degree Gemini, but Neptune was in the conjunction with Pluto. This would be with the Standard Oil. The unification of Standard Oil that would dissolve in 1911 by the corporate laws. And so that was Neptune Beta Persei, 1880s. Neptune Beta Persei in 2049 would be with Pluto in Pisces. And next to Formulaut. So this is still a building square. It's not yet a square, which is good. But Pluto will oppose Uranus. I think Hitler had a Pluto-Uranus opposition. No, he had a Pluto-Uranus trine, but I think the Second World War was with Pluto-Uranus opposition. Very difficult. The hard aspect between Pluto and, think about it, the Mito was Uranus Aries squaring Pluto. And Uranus will be building to square Neptune. It begins with Saturn in Capricorn, in its home sign, and Saturn and Jupiter are involved with Beta Persei. Jupiter would be exalted, but opposing Saturn. This can, Neptune, Chiron, and so on and so forth. Chiron at the time will be opposing Neptune at the time of the beginning, or planning to oppose Neptune, which is another very, very challenging factor, because Ketu in Scorpio, Chiron in Scorpio, is about curating the invisible ritual abuse. There's no two way around it. Okay, Scorpio is psychosexual issues that are also invisible, and Chiron is the wounded healer. Opposing Neptune in Beta Persei is, notwithstanding that a part of the curation with Beta Persei is many, many ritual abusers turning into stone. Yeah, Neptune. With Neptune, by the way, it doesn't necessarily, though it can denote, helpless situations that can happen in torture. It can also be immediate death. Like Neptune, the duality of Neptune is that it can be the sacrifice, but also the euthanasia. When Neptune conjoined Pluto from in the 1880s, which was, by the way, around the birth of Adolf Hitler. So one could say that Standard Oil timeline also birthed Adolf Hitler. And Marlene Dietrich, so two different people I don't remember about Eva Braun's chart. So Neptune-Pluto conjunction is different to what we're going to see in the 2040s, 2050s, late 2040s, 2050s. And this build-up to outer planets chart is happening at the separation of Uranus opposing Pluto. Not an easy aspect to begin with. So the minor outer planet Uranus is, and Aries will be doing the back and forth between Aries and Taurus. Pluto would be leaving the sextile with Aries, and Neptune will already have conjoined Aries, I think, in the 2030s. Both Neptune and Aries can have to do with plagues, because again, the use of occultism to siphon energy by rape of infants is creating inflammation, but it's also creating susceptibility to viruses. It's harming the immune system, and this is what creates a genetic degeneration, aside of, let's say, inbreeding. It's another factor. If I talked about biodiversity versus inbreeding and the importance of, let's say, abolishing inbreeding, then abolishing ritual abuse is the key to abolish inbreeding, and abolishing rape is a part of abolishing ritual abuse, and the lineages that withstand to that will have sustainability that comes with the power that is not hoarding power, is not oscillation of power, but is sustainable power that is able to evolve, transmute, and adapt, which essentially is what survives. Those are the those are the properties of what survives. Now, ritual abuse try to make it so that people will have to adapt to torture, which creates oscillations of power between torturers, but it doesn't solve the problem of inflammation or immune system. Basically, the generation of the race, and it causes people to believe that they need to achieve longevity by transmuting the consciousness by torture outside of the body. To abolish this type of beliefs and actually achieve longevity, we need to abolish rape and ritual abuse, and of course slavery that comes with it. And this abolishes all the decisions that yeah. So this is Neptune. Now let's take a look at Pluto. Pluto, Taurus, and I'm gonna remove the Neptune here. I'm gonna go to Pluto. And this is the longer cycle. So 1878 we last had Pluto on Beta Persei. (1879). Probably will be the formation of Standard Oil before it becomes a unified company, which tells us that this company was built on occultistic power that stemmed and perhaps this a timeline that made the Beta Persei, the Sedna stories that remain in verbal traditions of the Inuit. It could have altered those to really be compatible with the problems that Standard Oil caused. Um, Even people that have First Nation stories, the verbal stories may have been altered. So when people reconnect with their, First Nations traditions, some of those may have been altered by people that, by force, had to operate or benefited from trafficking the infants. Now, in the case of the most authentic to this was the father that thought he would get occult powers, and indeed the child got the occult powers and not the father. Because the occult powers were thought to have been by trafficking Sedna, or marrying her to someone that he thought that when that someone rapes his daughter, he will get kind of like Melissa's father not wanting Mark Dutroux to talk about the network. So now, um, uh, so this is something to take into account because those things were happening prior to the unification of Standard Oil, and they wanted to unify Standard Oil again, although we're nowhere anywhere near the conjunction. Sedna and Gemini, with Uranus Sedna rather than Pluto, Beta Persei, or Uranus Beta Persei rather than Pluto Beta Persei, is where the information about Beta Persei becomes very present, and this is where and we are so much operating in a system that, Uranus rules electricity, but electricity itself, if it is used to torture or to enslave, will not be free, will not be accessible. This is why we do not have Tesla's energy for Nikola Tesla back then. Even Nikola Tesla, they said Nikola Tesla was quite a supporter of hard work, and while that's lovely for an inventor, the people around might have not been satisfied, and this could have prevented. It did not appease Beta Persei, and Beta Persei is tropically in Taurus, I think also sidereally in Taurus. So it's kind of like with Beta Persei, no excuse. To win the Aldebaran win over land, one has to appease Beta Persei, otherwise it's a Pyrrhus win. And 1881, of course it's an outer planet, so it takes a little bit more time. And why don't... Okay, so we won't have it in 2100, that's obvious. Let's go 2 centuries forward, so we can see when will we have next Pluto, and I can do 2026 because '21, '22. So 21, '22, and we will have Uranus Procyon sextiling Pluto with Saturn and the Sun. Neptune is missing. Neptune 2 degrees Scorpio. Neptune is missing is one of the biggest astrological jokes that one could make. um, yes, Julian Assange had, I think, Neptune midheaven or Neptune in the 10th, and he was arrested at his absence. But I also have Neptune in the 10th, and now it's my Neptune square. Um, so Uranus sextiles Pluto. That would be the spirit of the times. Uranus Procyon with Saturn. Um, Uranus Saturn. Uranus Saturn can be associated with um, coming up with new fields of science, and with Pluto Beta Persei, we run the risk of the use of occultistic power um, by rape. And again, anything that does that, when it falls together with all that it brought. Because the science that it brings would always have that which is missing. Let's say if you and here's the thing: when the bridges fall, it's unannounced. Um, and this gnosis is not for nothing that Sirius, the bigger sun, when the Egyptians built pyramids, they were building pyramids, they were using slaves and so on and so forth. And then the gnosis that came was the 6-9, to balance feminine masculine energy. Back then it was thought to have been gnosis of the elite. And the elite still kept sacrificing and so on and so forth, and then they had to release the slaves. Until people don't rape, but all people, common people, leaders and so on and so forth, those things will continue to happen. And the elite power will always, they will never have the right prediction. Because they will always derive from the timeline that is corrupted, the timeline that is rapey. Mami, sorry, I'm recording. Predictions from a corrupted timeline or from a rapey timeline. How should I say that? It's not that they are inaccurate in the sense that they can't depict events. Because if we take a look at an event and each person taking a look from different perspective, they will see different things. There are people that look at the Holocaust and say it was because of assimilation and because women were not modest. Okay, it works great with perpetuation of war. and calling it anti-Semitism when people say, hey, these warmongering policies are not good. um, but it affects the warmongers. People can say blood libels when there's a generation of women that don't want to bring children. Why? Because there's no partner that honors the feminine. But aren't they feminists? Yes. No, they're not feminists by becoming men-like. They're able to rage, and they're able to relax, and they're only in the environment where they're able to be themselves, they can be. Now, children you don't bring to environment where one cannot even be themselves. So what's happening? What's happened there? Something maybe to do when they were infants. Oh, the blood libels. I don't know. I mean, who's doing that? In any case, that should be abolished. Now, for people say, oh, it's the Jews and so on. I think Jews don't have Mormon face, but I could be wrong. Shout out to the lady that traded eternal life for coffee. And she has a Mormon face. She has a Mormon face. Um, let's talk about Islam. 8th century. Where were Pluto and Neptune in the 8th century? You know what? Do I have a good Aries cycle? Aries around the zodiac years. Okay, 1840, 1875, Phoenix constellation, late zodiac sign. 1876, 1929, sculpture constellation. So just by the archetypes, Phoenix rising from the ashes. Sculpture, this would be the conjunction built into the sextile of Pluto Neptune. And this was the sculpting the infrastructure power dynamics, unfortunately by ritual rape. 1923 to mid 2044, Aries. This is where we are now. 2036 to 2065. 2036 to 2065, Aries will officially enter. She will not enter Pisces, she will enter Taurus. She will enter Aries and then Taurus. Okay, so this is a mistake in the AI. 2065, Aries what sidereal Aries, so this would be Taurus. So the for good is for Taurus, but because of the sidereal and the tropical, it might be before in the years. Peresus 2128. With 2122, we're gonna have Pluto Beta Persei. Aries enters Peresus constellation 2028, and 2073 enters Camelopardalis, where it will reach its northernmost declination. So, have the Aries transit. Lovely scan. The mix with the AI could definitely be done by a person that writes a blog as well. And Perseus constellation. So this doesn't tell me the entire 500-year cycle. We had the Phoenix, which was the later signs. But if I'm looking at where will Aries be when Pluto is with Beta Persei, is Taurus, and this if we go 500 years backwards from 2021, from 2122, so 500 years, 550 years, we would go to the 1500s. We would be around the 80 Years' War. So the 80 Years' War, there was occultistic rape of women, and this is why the women couldn't change the scripture. Then I stopped when I said the Huguenot women, they did not insist to change the scripture. They were because they were living their lives. Now, but because there was occultistic rape of the feminine, now the feminine can be women and can be infants. And so because of this, the women could not change the scriptures. When they could not change the scriptures, they could not tackle the discrepancies, because the esotericism works with the scripture. If I take a look at the Tema Mundi Egregore, then the version I was introduced to, not by a cult, but by a business, it was, and again, when I don't mention names, it's because I don't want, there was a lot of harm happening, so I don't know what caused this. And I try to avoid, I don't want the business to be targeted, and I don't want me to be targeted, and so on. So the text that came for the invocation was using the Night of Brahma, which I found very useful, but because it was the deepest sleep. And sleep is very important for creation. But then it used the Genesis. Wait a second. And Genesis was seen birthing as punishment. Genesis had slavery, and Genesis had occultistic rape of infants, and immediately my natural reaction, but I would begin to write about the Opus Dei, and what I looked for Magnum Opus, and then I saw there was it was a misnaming of a book that talked about the Masonic teachings and the fact that they think that not everybody can be free, which is slavery notion, and slavery notion cannot sustain creation. And the first thing I tended to with the Tema Mundi was rewriting Genesis and the birthing as orgasmic birthing and as something that can only be from willing consent, and of course could have been another reason that I was This episode is an ik maak probleem. So what it shows me is that the esoterics Be it Kabbalah, be it I don't know what. Darren Hayes, this is for you, asked about Kabbalah. When the esoterics is still writing, for example, when we think about the crown, you can talk about crown chakra, we think about the crown and the Yesod and those incarnations. If the crown is a god that represents so and so and so and so, and that god rapes children as a part of his occultistic rituals, then a person that, let's say, is coming to curate from abusive childhood, particularly abusive father, might not find the answer there. I was ritually abused when I was introduced to the spheres, the Sferot, and then what following ritually abused, I was seeing the things that, as a secular person, I did not expect to see, was something like the Mekubalim, which is basically this Rebbe, that Rebbe, that Rebbe, and so on and so forth. Kind of like that they were all in it. But it's the esoterics of that's also linked to the Epstein. Now, I'm not saying about Kabbalah and so on and so forth, but for that we'll have to have a zero rape, zero slavery esoterics in the Talmud, in the scriptures, and then the esoteric tradition and the scriptures, they are deriving one from another. And if I think about the creation, which is kind of like a Frankenstein, the Sefer Yetzirah, as one of the biggest problems, because this is how they try to create people, and it's done by rape, and then there's no sovereignty to the person. It affects the relations between children and fathers. I may have, I should have put the trigger before that. And then the people would look for answers, so they would look for esoteric traditions, or they run into, I don't know, the ability to manifest, and so on and so forth. And then they look for how to learn that, or how to get to know more about that. And yeah, that was the one fans chat where I got to speak with celebrity idol, because I'm from Israel, and they thought maybe I know Kabbalah. But yeah, so this is, and this is where, for each esoteric tradition, the occult rituals and the scriptures derive from each other. And in the Bible, indeed, we do not have a not rapey sex. I don't know, but pre-Abrahamic religions, whether it's the Bhagavad Gita or something like that, the notion that children are born with a debt to the parents is beyond harming. And I know that there were attempts to challenge the caste system. Now here is what I want to say. Of course, when a child is loved by the parents, then the natural response is, let's say, I don't know, if I was doing body butters, body salves, and I made body salve with the most expensive things and so on and so forth, and then I gifted to my mother. In the beginning, she didn't use it at all, and then she used it when she had a sunburn. Now, my parent, for them to use something, that's the same parent that didn't want to be when they went to the dentist, okay? And I thought they were going to a psychopath. So for me, it's the greatest compliment possible, and not only that, it smells better on them. And so in that sense, of course, me preparing of the things that I love and gifting that to my parent was an action that had a positive karmic action, that person uses my stuff. And if it wasn't good for them, they would not use it. That is one of the most sensitive things. So so for me, it was like, oh my gosh, that I'm actually competent. I can actually do something good regarding the skin, although I myself did not quite know how to treat my own skin. Not that there was any issue. It was like I was just not thinking about this, even when I had like the acne and stuff. I just thought it's a part of being an adolescent. Now, mommy, recording later. So, so in that sense, of course, we can think about how children can, by living their own lives um, and learning how to live their lives, also assist their parents, and it also kind of like the Indians would say that it pays out the karmic debt and so on and so forth. But if I tried to make a cream particularly for my mom, I probably wouldn't succeed. And I have tried. So this is where this um, this notion of debt, where the child is indebted to the parents, is putting a must where without rape, particularly without rape of infants, there is a natural. If I think about when I see kittens growing or children growing, they see their parents, they do like their parents. So in the beginning, let's say the Gemini phase, the children imitate the parents. Uranus Gemini is going to be different. Children that grow with Uranus Gemini would have a different response. But sometimes they can imitate the rebellion of the parents. Um, and so when we think about the scriptures, the Huguenot women did not insist to change the scriptures because they were separating something that's inseparable. And so when we insist on the scriptures, and I'm really am honoring the women that were pointing to the Talmud, whether it's Zionist Jewish lawyers like um, Roni Sadovnik Alonik, Roni Aloni Sadovnik, one of the, and she was both pointing out at the fact that the religion says to hate the to love the foreign as though it was a neighbor, and to the Talmudi. And there's another person, but here I'm afraid to name the name because they were already targeted, and I don't want. Um, and this is where, indeed, in the Talmud we see that the infant is shown to be okay to rape because they're not adolescent yet, or that they would permit to rape at war. Um, there's nothing more fifthly John than to permit to rape at war. I cannot stress that enough. This is why when NATO, before it began to apply its forces with the new Secretary General, the reminder of Security Council Decision 1325, which means that to prevent rape, but also if the UN forces or the peacekeeping forces are raping, also then it is held accountable, and of course that includes astral. Um, but all those things are important because rape undermines war. And it's also the discernment of whether it is economic hitmanship by, let's say, Standard Oil or actual war to defend sovereignty. When the Epstein list was falling out and people were no longer in the psychoerotic idealization of, let's say, espionage and stuff, then we saw the sovereigning up of the European nations in the face of United States. sovereignty, 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 but to complete that sovereignty, we have to change the scriptures and as well the actions and the esoterics, because esoterics rely on whether it's certain text or certain practices or certain intentions and incantations, and when those are not rapey, and when the action of the ritual is not rapey, then not the action and not the intention, then we get a clear channel for manifestation. But we also understand that from a non-rapey perspective, nature is not our enemy. If we are in nature that is too weird, we need to ask ourselves, what are the occultistic practices around this area or around the equator? Because people run from the equator to the poles. This is why what happened in Israel affected the entire world, because it happened in the equator. Some might even say that this area, just like we fix, and again, we have to sort the wheat from the chaff, so what I say here need to go through zero rape, zero slavery filter that I don't have the access to do, and this is when we think about feng shui and we think about an apartment, the middle of the apartment is supposed to be the heart and it's supposed to remain empty. Not because the heart is empty, but because you don't want to weight furnitures or weight anything on the heart. In that sense, I don't know, and I do think that Copernicus was not idealizing when he was talking about a sphere. I don't know if both the farther poles and the equator would be considered the heart, and if those should actually be empty, and that's why we see all the weird things that we see. And and if this is the case, it would mean that we would have comfortable weather around the globe. Shout out to the reindeers. Can I get away with that? When is Sirius rising? Definitely the previous Sirius rise was marking the sovereigning up of Europe. And definitely we see geopolitically what happens around the equator, but in that case Israel was the punkt. Then it affects the entire world, and so any place, any country, if we wipe Israel out of the planet and we put Palestine there, for example, if they do those weird esoterics, it would affect the entire world. And I do think that now a lot of people say that the Palestinian tribes came here from the peninsula because of desertification, although this area in the beginning it was not a desert. Up until 100 years ago, the back of the camels could not be seen from the sugar canes, and indeed I lived in Arad, but even in Beersheba we can see the sugar canes, the residues of these sugar canes growing in yards, and one would not believe this is a desert, and we thought that camels are desert area. They're not desert area animals. So and so if that is true, it means that the entire equator area should actually be empty, but to empty it up we need to abolish ritual abuse and rape from the equator. Then entire weather is comfortable and we can go to respective lands. And I do predict that since every individual have natal chart, and a great inspiration for that would be astrocartography, There's a lady that does astrocartography. She works with Hellenistic method. I owe you her name. And I do believe that every single person has a telos, and this telos is geographic as well. For example, I was born wherever we are born, we're gonna see Ketu. I was born in Kfar Saba, Israel. My Rahu is in the fourth house, which is motherland. But the geocartographic location would be around before Finnmark, from the Norwegian border. And indeed, when there was risk of nuclear, by the way, I still don't know if this place is not nuclear because nobody's going to bother to tell us. And then there was a recommendation that came from, and again, I'm cautious with names because I don't want to bring targeting to anyone. From the Slavs came wisdom that said, well, the needles, the acupuncture was good for Asians, for Slavs, which people that lived up north as well, to fast is good, and for radiation, the red fruits, the red berries. Then I began to eat the red berries frozen, but this is basically the things that I would pick up around the that I think that this is the only thing that's growing still around the tundras. Now, but the question is, how do I get there? Well, it's not even a question. Abolish rape here. If I need to be there, it's raw. I will materialize being there. If I don't need to be there, I will materialize the discoveries that I don't know yet of where I'll be. But I do want to take into account that the relation to land can include the telos of a human being per individual, which means that different people can travel safely to different locations. And when you abolish rape, then the telos and the motivation for traveling is stemming from love that is actually loving rather than from lack or necessity that comes from lack. Okay, think about children. Children are born, they see bird, they naturally want to learn how to fly. I'm very lucky that I survived my attempts to try to flap my arms without even any cloth attached to them and try to fly like birds and jumping from the cabinet where my clothes were stored. And I was sure I managed to flip fast enough that I held myself one slight of a millisecond in the air more. Was it my consciousness or my imagination? I don't know. But I would be fascinated both about whales and about aviation. Not in the sense of where you see knowing exactly the model of each plane and so on. I took a plane only twice, when I was 12 and then during COVID. Both of them, was something I think broken around the window. For the other one, they asked me to sit next to the window, and I'm like, oh, I'm very happy. Because there were no people, there were nobody to sit next to the window. And so I got to see, it was a morning flight, and I got to see the clouds and then the Alpines. I wish for people better circumstances than the circumstances I was traveling. Yes, 2016 Aries was joining Uranus at 23 Aries, which was already around my Mercury. Squaring Pluto back then. Aries squared Pluto in 2019-2020, that was COVID. and the supposed death of Epstein. Oh, sacred. Feminine.